Hi, it's Katrina! From abandoned buildings to creepy underground tunnels, here are 9 of the most fascinating abandoned places in the world. Number 9. Old City Hall Station, New York. New York City's first subway was opened in 1904, and the Old City Hall Station in New York was its first terminal. The building was designed by George Louis Hines and Christopher Grant Lafarge, who also designed the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. The architecture is stunning, with glass-tiled floors, large chandeliers, and vaulted ceilings built according to a tiling technique patented by Rafael Guastavino Moreno. Side note, he was a Spanish architect and engineer who immigrated to the US in 1881, and he was one talented guy. The building is in the Romanesque Revival style, with dozens of intricate skylights that allow natural light to illuminate the interior. There were also beautiful brass chandeliers. The problem with the station, and the thing that led to its abandonment in 1945, was that the curved platform was too short to accommodate train cars that had doors in the middle. Only subway trains with doors at the ends could load and unload their passengers, and by the end of World War II, the demand for subway service outstripped the station's ability to keep up. Today, the station is owned by the New York City Transit Museum, which offers guided tours for museum members. Number 8. Bodie Ghost Town, California. This ghost town is nestled in the Bodie Hills just east of the Sierra Nevada mountains in California. A gold mining boom town when it was founded in 1876, Bodie just died out really when the mines eventually played out. By the time it was officially listed as a ghost town in 1943, Bodie had exactly 3 residents. There are 110 buildings still standing in Bodie, including one of the old gold mills. In many of the buildings, the interiors are still furnished and stocked with goods, as if the residents had just left with every intention of coming back. There are hundreds of thousands of artifacts in Bodie, ranging from mining equipment to abandoned cars to china and even the square nails that were used in the original construction. The town is currently a state park that's administered by the Bodie Foundation, and it's against their rules for anyone to take any of the little artifacts out of the city, down to the tiniest nail. It's said that anybody who takes anything from Bodie will fall under the Bodie curse. The curse means you will suffer bad luck and personal disasters until the stolen item is returned. To this day, park rangers regularly receive letters containing bits of glass, nails, china shards, and even an animal jawbone, all of them sent back by people who took from Bodie what Bodie didn't want to give, and all because people started feeling the curse take effect. Hopefully this won't happen to you. Number 7. Tempelhof Airport, Berlin, Germany. Tempelhof Airport was one of Berlin's first airports. It was built in 1927 on land that had once belonged to the mysterious medieval order, the Knights Templar. I'm serious! The first terminal was replaced by a new, grander building in 1934, which is where the airport's checkered history begins. The new building was designed by Professor Ernst Sagebiel at the behest of Albert Speer, who was dedicated to building Germania, Hitler's proposed Aryan world capital. The building itself was one of the 20 largest buildings on Earth when it was built, but perversely had the world's smallest duty-free shop. The floor plan was meant to resemble the spread wings of an eagle, something that reflected the iconography used by the Nazi Party. During World War II, Lufthansa used the Tempelhof as their base of operations right until the fall of Berlin. The building is still massive. The main terminal is over 1.2 kilometers long, with 4 levels and bunkers and tunnels underneath it. When the Soviets took the eastern half of Berlin in April 1945, they took the Tempelhof. The airport was handed over to the US as part of the partition of Germany, but not before the Soviets burned and flooded the 2 lowest levels of the structure. Once the location came under US control, it was used as a hub for the Berlin airlift, when Western powers airlifted food and other supplies to the beleaguered people of the newly created East Berlin. Today, the Tempelhof is a protected site under German law, and the land around the circular runways has been turned into a public park. That hardly counts as abandoned, but the massive old building is still a beacon for urban explorers from Europe and beyond. Number 6. Michigan Central Station, Detroit, Michigan. Dedicated in 1914, the Michigan Central Station serviced Amtrak train traffic until it was closed and abandoned in January 1988. The station consists of a train depot and an attached office tower, which has 2 mezzanine levels and an additional 13 stories. At 230 feet, the tower made the Michigan Central Station the tallest rail station in the world when it was built. The building was designed by the architectural firms Warren and Wetmore and Reed and Stern, who had also designed New York's Grand Central Station. The building itself was once a jewel in the Beaux Art classic style, with the main floor modeled after an ancient Roman bathhouse. There are marble walls, vaulted ceilings, and a large hall outfitted with Doric columns that held the ticket offices and arcade shops. The passenger concourse was graced with copper skylights. Michigan Central Station has been used as a movie set many times, including in music videos by local son Eminem. The building was purchased by the Ford Motor Company in May 2018, and it is now undergoing renovation. If you want to see this beautiful old building, you'd better hurry. Number 5. Murphy Ranch, Los Angeles, California. The Murphy Ranch outside Los Angeles was built in the 1930s by Nazi sympathizers Winona and Norman Stevens, who intended to use the ground as a base of operations for Nazis in the USA. The Stevens belonged to a white supremacist group called the Silver Legion of America, and they were pretty disagreeable people, to put it mildly. The ranch was designed to be as self-sufficient as possible, with storage tanks, fuel tanks, a bomb shelter, farming equipment, and several outbuildings. The idea was that it would be able to sustain itself for a long period of time without any help or interference from the outside world when the Great Race War came. Ironically, the main gate to the estate was designed by an African American named Paul Williams. The gate didn't keep the authorities out in 1941, when they seized control of the ranch in the wake of the Pearl Harbor attack. All 50 caretakers on the site at the time of the raid were arrested. Today, the place is a shadow of its former self because several buildings had to be demolished due to unsafe conditions. Some remain though, including the powerhouse, which is a concrete structure that once housed the ranch's diesel generators. The ranch is owned by the city of Los Angeles, and all entryways have been sealed, meaning that if you go there and get caught trespassing, don't tell them I sent you. Number 4. The Catacombs of Rome. Everyone has heard of the Paris catacombs, but did you know that there are catacombs under the city of Rome too? These subterranean passageways were once used as burial grounds for Jewish, pagan, and early Christian citizens of the Eternal City, beginning in the 2nd century AD. The people stopped using the catacombs as burial places in the 5th century, but by then they had built long passageways that were several miles long. The walls had rectangular niches carved into them, and these niches are where the bodies would be laid to rest. The catacombs were also used as hideouts by Christians during the days of persecutions ordered by the Roman emperors. It was the sheer unpleasantness of the place that kept the authorities from following the Christians down into the tunnels. All of those niches held bodies that hadn't been embalmed, and even though the heat of an Italian summer didn't penetrate into the catacombs, those bodies still decayed, making the catacomb a foul-smelling and ghoulish place. The persecution of Christians was ended by the Edict of Milan in the year 313, and when it was finally safe to come back into the light, the Christians took out most of their burials and all of the sacred relics that they had hidden in the catacombs. They took them to churches around Rome by order of the popes. By the time the all-clear was sounded, though, the catacombs had become the almost last resting place of popes, saints, martyrs, and entire families of many Christians. Most of the 60 catacombs have been abandoned and aren't really safe to explore, but there are still 5 that are open to the public. The catacombs of San Sebastiano are a full 23 kilometers long. Those of San Callisto were once the tomb of 16 popes and dozens of martyrs. The catacombs of Domitilla, 15 kilometers long, were only rediscovered in 1594 and were named after the granddaughter of the Emperor Vespasian, who was herself a saint. The catacombs of Priscilla are known for their sacred art, including the first ever depiction of the Virgin Mary. Last but not least are the catacombs of Saint Agnes, who was buried there after she was martyred in typically gory fashion. No need to go into detail. Number 3. New York's Freedom Tunnel. Continuing underground, now we're in New York City. A former Amtrak tunnel under Riverside Park in Manhattan, the Freedom Tunnel was named after graffiti artist Chris Freedom Pape, who used the walls to create some of his most notable work. The tunnel was built in 1930 and abandoned in 1980. It was almost immediately taken over by the homeless of the city, who created a shanty town in the tunnels. Some of the people were homeless and had nowhere else to go. Others in the shantytown were activists who were protesting the astronomical rent in New York. The city bulldozed the shantytown in 1991. Street artists and graffiti artists have used the tunnels as galleries. Natural light shining through the sidewalk grates in Riverside Park creates a spotlight effect, which illuminates the outsider art, some of which has become quite famous in the art community. The city, in its wisdom, chose to paint over some of the artwork, including some created by Freedom himself, but there are still murals and paintings left to see. The homeless people living in Freedom Tunnel were the subjects of Tunnel People, a book written in 2010 by Toon Voten, an anthropologist and journalist, if you want to learn more. Number 2. The Labyrinth of St. Paul, Minneapolis, Minnesota. A complex network of abandoned utility tunnels under St. Paul, Minnesota has been called the Labyrinth, and it's currently owned and protected by an urban exploration group called the Action Squad. Access is closely guarded, but if you are able to get in, you will find 15 miles of multi-level interconnected tunnels that are occupied mostly by cockroaches, aggressive sewer rats, pigeons, and sometimes even freshwater crayfish. Who knows, maybe there's even an alligator or two. There's sewage in some places and vertical shafts with 60-foot drops in others. There's also an abandoned 5-story freight elevator shaft. The tunnels were built in 1865 for telephone, gas, and trolley lines. The labyrinth remained in use for 90 years, finally being closed off in 1955. There are maps available of the labyrinth from when it was still in use, but there are dangers and alterations that have occurred over time. Out of all the places on this list, the labyrinth might be the most dangerous to explore. Number 1. Beelitz-Heilstatten Hospital, Berlin. In 1898, Berlin's health insurance authority built a tuberculosis sanatorium and nursing home on 140 hectares of land. All civilian patients were evicted on August 3, 1914, and their wards were rededicated to caring for German soldiers who were injured in the battles of World War I. The facility was taken over by the Red Cross and expanded. Over 12,000 German soldiers were treated there over the course of the First World War, including one Adolf Hitler, who suffered a grenade wound to his thigh during trench fighting. In 1920, the hospital reverted to the care of civilians, and it was expanded again, this time to house 1,338 tuberculosis cases. World War II came along, and the civilians were again kicked to the curb to make room for German soldiers. When Germany fell, the Soviet Union took control of the hospital, and it became the largest Soviet military hospital outside of the USSR. The Russians finally left the place in 1994. Investors tried to step in and make something out of the hospital, but they failed to get anywhere, and the place was outright deserted in 2001. Following that, the buildings were deserted, becoming the site of numerous bloody murders over the years. Today, the building stands abandoned, with the ghosts of its Soviet occupation clear to see. There are Stalinist murals on the walls, Russian graffiti in the attics, and the statue of a Soviet soldier outside, perpetually on guard. Because of the murders there, though, including the victims of the so-called Beast of Beelitz, locals believe that there are ghosts of a different kind in the hospital. Would you visit any of these places, or have you already? Let me know in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye!